We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Morning light filtered through the ivory silk curtains, spilling across the cold white walls of the 49th floor penthouse. The stillness was uncanny, broken only by the faint hiss of wind against the glass, and that familiar scent sandalwood, mint, and a trace of expensive leather wrapping around Lila like an old whisper. She shifted slightly. The cool silk sheet slid over her skin, making her shiver. Her bare shoulder, the warmth still lingering, not her own. The sensation jolted her upright, heart hammering. The room opened wide before her. A massive abstract painting hung on the wall, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the New York skyline, and a black dress shirt draped carelessly over a leather chair. Everything was too familiar. Too him. Her hand flew to her chest, as if to steady her pulse. Part of her still couldn't believe this was real, that after 3 years, she was waking up again in Damien Black's room. The man she had once loved, once left, and once sworn never to return to. His cologne still clung to her skin. It threaded into her hair, into every breath. And when her fingers brushed her neck, they trembled, the faint red mark still there. Memory crashed in like a wave. The warm golden lights of last night's project launch party. Cold champagne dissolving on her lips. He had stood in the crowd, black suit, that smile she used to know by heart. His gaze had cut into her like a blade, cold, but sharp enough to make her forget to breathe. She remembered the alcohol, the slow music when they'd somehow ended up standing side by side, the way his eyes dipped as he asked, voice low, "Still love sandalwood?" She hadn't answered. Then the song changed and his mouth found hers, slow, deep, clumsy, and aching. She remembered nothing after that except the image of his eyes in the light, near yet far, as if 3 years had never passed. And now he was lying next to her. Damien Black, the CEO of Blackwood Media, the man everyone called the one without a heart. Morning light cut across his face, sharpening his jawline and casting shadows under his lashes. He was still beautiful to the point of cruelty. It was that very beauty that had once made her forget who she was. Lila inhaled sharply, clutching the edge of the blanket, inching back, forcing herself to steady. She had to get out. Now. She didn't want to face him. She didn't want to wake the ghosts they had both buried. But as soon as her feet touched the floor, his voice came low, hoarse like a blade slicing through the silence. "Running away again, Lila?" She froze. Her hands still on the sheet, her heart seemed to stop. She turned. Damien was awake, leaning against the headboard, eyes as deep as a moonless night. His hair was slightly mussed, a few strands falling onto his forehead, and that look, no longer the look of a stranger. She stammered, not knowing where to begin. He tilted his head slightly, a faint bitter smile curving his lips. 3 years. You're still good at disappearing." She gripped the blanket tighter, forcing her voice steady. "This was a mistake, Damien. Last night was just—" "A mistake?" he cut in, voice low. "Then why are you still trembling when you talk to me?" Lila bit her lip, eyes sliding away. "Because you scare me." He gave a small, joyless laugh. "I scare you or you're scared of yourself." The air between them thickened. In the silence, she could hear her own heartbeat. She drew a deep breath, trying to find distance. "I don't want to repeat the past." "The past?" He rose, walking toward her. His voice deepened, every word brushed with memory. "What you call the past is everything I have left." Only a few steps now separated them. She backed away until her back hit the wall. Damien stopped right in front of her, his scent closing in, familiar to the point of suffocation. That gaze, that voice, everything was dragging her back to 3 years ago, to a time when she still believed love could conquer all. He lifted his hand, stopping just short of her throat, his thumb brushing the faint red mark on her skin. His voice softened, but it still cut like a knife. "I tried to forget you, Lila. Believe me. But every time I close my eyes, I still smell this scent, still see this look, and still wonder why you left without a word." She closed her eyes, tears pricking. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Sometimes love isn't enough to stay. He leaned down, his breath touching her lips. Then don't love this time. Stay. Just be real. Lila opened her eyes. In the dim light, she saw herself reflected in his no longer the brave girl she once was, but someone still trembling because of him. She inhaled, prying his hand away. I can't. I've learned how to live without you. Damien nodded slowly, a faint smile ghosting his lips. Good, because this time I'll be the one to make you forget how. She didn't answer. She only rushed past him, searching for her dress on the floor. But as her hand touched the door handle, she heard his voice behind her low, no longer the voice of a cold CEO, but of the man who had once loved her to the edge. If you walk out now, Lila, I won't let you disappear so easily again. She froze, a tear falling into her clenched palm. Then, without another word, she opened the door and stepped out. Morning light flooded the hallway, cold and blinding. Behind her, Damien sat still, eyes fixed on the door that had just closed, his hands gripping the sheet where her scent still lingered. 3 years and one night enough to bring it all back. He whispered, voice breaking like wind against glass. You can leave, Lila, but don't think the past is dead. 3 years ago, June in New York, the season of sudden rain showers and crimson sunsets spilling down Fifth Avenue. Lila remembered it vividly, those nights when she was young enough to believe that love alone was enough. Back then, Damien Black wasn't yet the cold, untouchable CEO of Blackwood Group. He was a 29-year-old man, ambitious and restless, working day and night to prove himself worthy of his family's name. But whenever he returned to that small apartment on 74th Street, he became her Damien again, the man who smiled, who listened, who made coffee every morning even though he never drank it. You forgot lunch again, he'd say, his tone half teasing, half worried. How are you going to paint if you pass out? She'd glance up from her sketch table and grin. If I stop painting, I might as well stop breathing. And then he'd kiss her forehead, his gaze a mix of pride and fear. Their love was simple, but it burned brightly like the colors on Lila's design boards, vibrant, messy, and real. Damien once told her, I never thought someone could make me feel at peace just by being there. She smiled softly. That's because you're used to perfection. And I'm just real. 3 years ago, everything seemed to be heading toward a beautiful ending. Damien had proposed to her in the rooftop garden of the Blackwood building, surrounded by 1,000 twinkling lights and the soft notes of a piano. The ring was simple, a small diamond, nothing extravagant, but the look in his eyes when he slipped it onto her finger shone like the beginning of a new world. Lila Dawson, he whispered, you may not be the one my family chose, but you're the one I choose. She had cried, nodded. That night they stayed together, his kiss tasting of wine and faith, a faith that love could overcome anything. But that faith didn't last long. 3 days later, Eleanor Black, Damien's mother, came to see her. The small apartment was filled with sunlight, but the moment the woman stepped in, the light seemed to retreat. She wore a gray suit, tall and poised, her face as cold as marble. The air carried her perfume classic, heavy the scent of power and disdain. You're Lila Dawson? Her tone was clipped without greeting. Yes, ma'am. Your father owns Dawson Design, correct? Lila nodded slightly, uncertain where this was going. Eleanor placed her leather purse on the table gently, yet with enough force to make Lila's stomach tighten. Do you know where my son stands in the Blackwood Group? And where you stand? Lila clenched her fists, her voice trembling but calm. I love him. That should be enough. Enough for what? Enough to make him lose everything? Her words sliced through the air like a knife. I don't hate you, Miss Dawson, but you don't belong in our world. And if you truly love him, she paused, locking eyes with Lila, then disappear so he can have a future. Lila took a step back. Are you threatening me? Eleanor smiled thin, sharp like the edge of a blade. I'm only stating facts. Your father's company is in debt. I could destroy it in a day, but I could also save it if you do the right thing. Her voice was calm, almost kind, but each word branded itself into Lila's memory. Love is a luxury. My son cannot afford the cost of your impulsiveness. When the door closed behind her, Lila sank into the chair, trembling so badly she couldn't hold a pencil. The ring on her hand caught the sunlight, a painfully bright light. That night, Damien called. His voice was filled with worry. "Are you okay? Did my mother say something that upset you?" She swallowed hard, fighting the tears. "No, nothing. I want to see you. Tomorrow I'll talk to her whether she approves or not." "Don't," she cut in, tears spilling. "You don't have to. Lila, I love you. Don't make me." She hung up. Her hands shook as she folded a blank sheet of paper. "I'm sorry. I can't go on." 6 words, but each one tore through her heart. She slipped the ring into an envelope, left it on the table, and walked out as dawn began to break. Outside, the summer rain began to fall. Each drop that hit her shoulders sounded like the shattering of a dream. As she passed the Blackwood building, she saw the office light still burning high above. Damien must still be working. She wanted to stop, to run upstairs, to tell him she wasn't leaving because she stopped loving him, but because she loved him too much. Yet her feet wouldn't stop. She knew that once the door closed behind her, everything would change. She would no longer be the woman in his arms, just a trace of memory he could learn to hate. 3 years later, he truly did hate her. When their eyes met again at last night's gala, Lila had seen it not only surprise, but the same raw pain that had never healed. And she, despite all her effort to hide it, still trembled at the sound of his voice. "Running away again, Lila?" His words from that morning still echoed in her head. She knew it was only a matter of time before he asked, "Why?" And she didn't know if she had the strength to answer. Because sometimes love doesn't die from betrayal, but from a promise kept so the one you love can be free. 3 years later, New York still blazed as if it had never known darkness. But for Lila Dawson, every time a plane touched down in this city, her chest tightened as though even the air here still held a memory she didn't dare touch. She was back. This time not as the young girl with a battered suitcase and a heart full of dreams, but as the creative director of Dawson Studio, a small design firm suddenly on every journalist's radar. The new collaboration was called True Legacy, a global campaign for one of the world's top media conglomerates. A chance that could change her entire career. In the elevator, her assistant Maya said, "Lila, if today's meeting goes smoothly, your name will be on every ad industry cover." Lila smiled faintly. "I don't need fame, Maya. I just want a project done right." The elevator doors slid open. White light poured in. The sign ahead read, Blackwood Media Group. Lila froze. Her lips pressed tight. Her heart felt crushed in a sudden grip. Fate's idea of a joke? She looked around. That logo was the same one she had seen hundreds of times on Damien's papers. It couldn't be. For 3 years, she had avoided anything with the name Black on it. And now here she was, standing at the doors of his empire. The conference room lay on the 38th floor. Glass walls opened onto a panoramic view of the city, the Hudson River glinting in the distance. Directors, department heads, the creative team, the room was full, professional but cold. The door opened. Lila stepped in wearing a pristine white suit, her stride steady. Her gaze looked calm, though her heart pounded like a drum. She set her presentation folder on the table, her smile measured and exact. Then the door on the opposite side opened. The secretary's voice carried across the room. "Mr. Damien Black, CEO, Blackwood Media." The atmosphere shifted. Everyone rose, and for a few seconds, the sound of his footsteps on marble echoed straight through her chest. Damien walked in taller, harder, the years only sharpening his arrogance. A charcoal gray suit framed his lean, powerful build. A black tie, eyes like steel. Lila lifted her chin. In that instant, the world seemed to pause. His gaze landed on her, quick and deep enough to steal her breath. Gone was the man who had once made her coffee, who had laughed with her on rainy nights. Before her now was Damien Black, a man of power and ice. His eyes skimmed over her, stopping just a heartbeat longer, then moved on as he strode to the head of the table. "Please sit," he said curtly, his voice low and rough but firm. The meeting began. Lila presented the True Legacy campaign, inspired by the idea of transmitting authentic emotion through every visual detail, a style she believed modern audiences were starving for. She spoke with her usual poise and passion, but the entire time she could feel his eyes on her, heavy, silent, unbroken. When she finished, Damien gave a small nod, expressionless. Good concept. A pause, and he leaned back slightly, his eyes still fixed on her face. But I have a question, Miss Dawson. She met his gaze, voice steady. Yes? He tilted his head, speaking slowly, each word falling like a challenge. Are you here to collaborate, or to see if I still care? Lila held her composure so tightly it was almost frightening. She smiled lightly, answering softly, I'm here for work, Mr. Black. Feelings. I left in the past. The words slid out like a velvet-covered blade. Damien's mouth curved a smile so brief and cold it dropped the temperature of the room. Good. I only work for the company. He paused, eyes still locked on hers. Just business. The meeting ended. One by one, people filed out. Only the two of them remained. The air turned suffocating. Lila gathered her papers, carefully avoiding his gaze. Then that familiar voice came low, hoarse, as if holding something caged inside. 3 years, and you still know how to make a room suffocate just by standing in it. She didn't turn around. We don't need to talk about the past, Damien. Don't need to? He gave a quiet laugh. Then why did you leave without a word? Why let me believe you'd betrayed me? You don't know everything. Then tell me. Lila's grip tightened on the folder in her hands. No, because if you knew, you'd hate me even more. I've hated you enough already, he said, his voice catching. Now I just want to understand. Silence. Under the white light of the conference room, their shadows stretched across the table, two silhouettes near each other, unable to touch. At last, Lila spoke, her voice low but firm. I didn't come back for your understanding. I came back to work, to prove that even without you, I can stand on my own. She turned, hand on the door handle, refusing to look back. But before she stepped out, she heard his voice behind her low, almost a confession. If you really wanted to forget, Lila, you wouldn't have trembled when you met my eyes today. The door closed. The room sank back into silence, leaving Damien alone. He stared at the chair where she had just sat, drawing a deep breath. The scent of jasmine still lingered in the air, soft, proud, and aching, like the woman he had never stopped loving. He lowered his head, a self-mocking smile ghosting his lips. Just business, right? Then he looked up, steel glinting in his eyes reflected on the glass wall. If this is business, then I'm ready to do it for a lifetime. 3 weeks after the first meeting, in the 45th floor office of Blackwood Media, the air always felt compressed. Lila sat at a small desk by the window, Manhattan blazing below in the late afternoon sun. Behind her at the large walnut desk, Damien Black spoke to a partner on the phone, his voice low, hoarse, restrained, each word a command. 3 months. They had to work together for 3 whole months on the True Legacy campaign. 3 months under the same roof where every glance, every breath was a test. Lila tried to focus on the design glowing on her screen, but each time he walked past, that scent slipped into her mind like a living memory. Sandalwood, mint, and something warm, dangerous, unmistakably his. She hated herself for still knowing it by heart. Across the room, Damien wasn't faring much better. He spoke about brand strategy, but his eyes kept sliding back to her. Soft brown hair loose over her shoulders, hands moving swiftly across the sketches. The lamp's reflection playing on her smooth cheek, everything about her drove him mad. She sat there silent, serene, as if the last 3 years had been nothing but work between them. Do you want to take a look at the mock-up? Her voice rose, light but enough to pull him out of his thoughts. He nodded slightly and walked over. She handed him the drawings, her fingers brushing his only for a second, but they both felt the current spark through their skin. The palette's a little too warm, he said in a low tone. This campaign needs more strength. No, it needs truth, she replied, eyes still on the sketch. Strength isn't always in cool tones, Damien. You're teaching me branding now? No, just reminding you, people don't buy products. They buy feelings. He looked at her, and suddenly his eyes softened the look that made her turn away at once. Beneath the cold veneer, she still saw the man who once laughed at her doodle on a napkin. But he wasn't her lover anymore. He was her boss, Mr. Black. The days dragged on like that. Meetings, clashes of ideas, silent afternoons in the conference room. Neither spoke of the past, but the past seeped into every small gesture, the way she avoided his eyes, the way he feigned indifference when she chatted with other staff. One late night, when the office was empty, Lila stayed behind. City lights spilled against the glass, reflecting her figure as she bent over the drafting table, a soft glow enveloping her. On the page lay the final logo design, a single curve reaching toward the light, a symbol of rebirth. Damien stood in the doorway, watching silently. He had been about to leave, but the sight of her stopped him cold. She was still the same, focused, gentle, carrying that something which seemed to warm the entire room. "You haven't changed," he said at last, voice low and rough, breaking the hush. "Still making everything around you come alive." Lila looked up. The light caught in her eyes, deep and glimmering. She smiled faintly, not looking away, but her voice came slowly. "And you haven't changed either. Still making everything around you suffocate." A beat of silence passed. He stepped inside slowly. The soft echo of his shoes on the wood floor pulled the distance tighter. "You know I don't mean to," he said quietly. "I know," she answered, eyes fixed on the sketch. "But you also know you have a way of making people lose their breath." Damien stopped just behind her, close enough that his breath brushed her hair. He bent slightly, his voice low. "And you always know how to make me never forget." Lila gripped the pen in her hand. She didn't turn, but her heart pounded against her ribs. "Damien, this is a workplace." "I know." "Then keep your distance." He paused a beat, then gave a faint smile. "I'm trying, but every time I see you, that distance disappears." She turned, eyes shining a little under the light. 3 years, Damien. We already had our chance to keep our distance. And you used it to run. And you used it to become cold." He arched a brow. "It was the only way to survive without you." The words made her freeze. A moment of silence, then Lila gave a sad, soft laugh. "You've done well. Now you have everything. And me." She looked back at the sketch, her voice fading. "I'm left with the things I can't say." He stared at her for a long time. Then, as if afraid he might say something he shouldn't, he stepped back. "Tomorrow we approve the final version. Go home early, Lila." He turned and walked out. Only after the door clicked shut did she exhale hard, hands clutching her chest as if to steady her wild heartbeat. On the desk, the lamp glowed over a line she had just written beside the logo. "Some things never die." Out in the hallway, Damien leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Her words still echoed in his head like an old refrain. "You still make everything suffocate." He gave a small laugh, but it was full of ache. Maybe she was right, because he too was suffocating in this world. A world where he had everything except her. Friday afternoon, Manhattan drowned beneath the autumn rain. The sky hung in shades of lead. Crowds rushed by under black umbrellas, and raindrops slid down the glass canopy of the Langford Hotel, where Lila had been invited for a private meeting about the project. The moment she stepped inside, something felt off. No assistant, no PR representative waiting. Only a woman seated in the corner lounge, a cup of steaming mint tea before her. The woman wore a charcoal suit dress, a string of pearls at her wrist, her silver-streaked hair styled to perfection, and eyes so cold they made people forget she had once been the very image of New York elegance. Eleanor Black, Damien's mother. Lila froze. Her heart clenched as if an invisible hand had seized it. The memories crashed back, the echo of heels on marble. That commanding voice. "If you love my son, disappear." "Sit down," Eleanor said softly. Her tone didn't need volume. It carried authority by nature. Lila obeyed, folding her hands beneath the table to hide their tremor. 3 years ago, Eleanor began, eyes still on her tea, "I gave you an opportunity. You know what I mean." Lila's voice was quiet but steady. "An opportunity to vanish." A faint smile touched the older woman's lips, thin, glacial. "You did the right thing then, but it seems you've learned nothing. You came back, thinking things would be different?" "I came back for work." "Don't lie to me, Miss Dawson. Women can fool the world, but never a mother." She lifted her gaze sharp, cutting straight through Lila. "You still love him." The air between them thickened. Rain hammered against the windows, but inside silence pressed down like stone. Lila swallowed hard, then said, her voice trembling yet resolute. Your son deserves to know the truth. Eleanor set her teacup down with a sharp clack, making a nearby waiter flinch. The truth? Which truth? That you were the distraction that nearly cost him his career? That I had to save him from you? Lila drew a deep breath, her fingers tightening. No, ma'am. The truth is, you were the reason we broke apart, and you're still trying to destroy what's left. Eleanor gave a low, mirthless laugh. I only did what was necessary to protect my son. And you, what could you possibly bring him but trouble? Her words cut off as footsteps echoed behind them. Lila turned and her heart stopped. Damien. He stood just inside the lobby, rainwater glistening on his black suit, his gaze fixed on them. He halted, looking from his mother to Lila. His eyes were dark steel. Lila, his voice was low, cautious. What's going on here? No one answered. Lila met his gaze, desperate to explain, but her throat closed. Eleanor, as always, broke the silence first. My son, she said calmly. I was merely having a word with Miss Dawson. She seems unclear about her position. Damien frowned. Her position? Eleanor's tone sharpened. As the woman who should leave you before you lose everything again. Lila rose abruptly. You have no right. But Damien lifted a hand, stopping her. His gaze moved between them, finally settling on his mother. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, strained, every word dragged from somewhere deep inside. 3 years ago, it was you? The world seemed to stop breathing. Eleanor blinked once, then replied crisply, I did what I had to do to protect you. Damien stood motionless. 1 second, 2. Then he gave a soft, broken laugh, a sound that wasn't laughter at all, but something cracking. Protect me? His voice wavered. By destroying the woman I loved? Lila bowed her head. Tears spilled over her hand. Eleanor didn't look at her. She spoke only to him, tone hard as glass. If I hadn't acted that day, you would have lost everything. That girl would have dragged you down. No. Damien shook his head, every word slicing through the air. You dragged me down. You made me believe she betrayed me. You turned me into the man you wanted, one who trusts no one, not even himself. His voice broke, rough with 3 years of buried anger. Do you have any idea, Mother, how many nights I saw her in my dreams? How much I hated myself for still loving the woman you said wasn't worthy. Eleanor rose, her hand trembling slightly, though her eyes stayed sharp. Damien, I did it for your future. Don't let your emotions. Emotions? He cut her off. His tone thundered through the quiet lobby. Emotions are what make me human, Mother. Not the empire, not the shares, not the walls you built around your heart. Heads turned. Guests stared. Lila clutched her purse, silent tears streaming down her face. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. She turned and walked away. Lila, Damien called after her, but she didn't stop. She left him standing there alone, under the gaze of strangers and the relentless rain outside. He stood still for a long time. His heart was torn in two between love and loyalty, between the son he had been and the man he wanted to be. Finally, he turned to his mother. His eyes were ice. Thank you, Mother. Now I understand why I've spent the last 3 years so successful, yet so utterly miserable. Then he walked out into the storm, no umbrella, letting the rain pour down on him. That night, the highway was nearly empty. Streetlights stretched endlessly across the wet pavement, and golden streaks reflected on his windshield. Damien drove through the rain, jaw tight, face stone still. The wipers clicked rhythmically, the only sound besides his pounding heart. And in his mind, one sentence echoed over and over, like a curse he couldn't shake. I only did what was necessary to protect you. Protect him, or steal his future entirely? The rain hadn't stopped that night. Damien's car pulled up before Black Manor, the old stone estate on the northern edge of Manhattan, where every marble step and carved pillar carried the scent of power and control. He killed the engine and sat still in the dark. Raindrops pounded against the hood, blending with the sound of his own heavy breathing. In his mind, one voice echoed over and over. I only did what was necessary to protect you. His hands clenched around the steering wheel. Then he opened the door. A gust of cold wind hit him, soaking his shirt through, but he didn't care. His footsteps echoed across the rain-slicked stone courtyard like distant thunder. The living room glowed with the fire's light. Eleanor Black sat upright in an antique armchair, a glass of red wine in her hand, her eyes fixed on the window. When the door opened, she didn't turn. Her voice came soft, calm, but sharp enough to command. I knew you'd come. Damien stepped inside, his coat still dripping with rain, eyes hard as steel. He stopped in the center of the room and spoke, his voice hoarse but clear. You took away the woman I loved and called it protection. Eleanor finally turned, her face composed, unshaken. Don't talk like a man who's lost his reason, my son. Reason? He gave a bitter laugh. You taught me to be strong, to choose what mattered most. But did you ever ask me what that was? You already know, she said evenly. It's Blackwood Group. No. Damien shook his head, stepping closer. It's Lila. Eleanor set her wineglass down, the sound of crystal on wood, sharp and ringing. If you still have any sense, she said slowly, you'll end this with her. If not, I'll withdraw every cent I've invested in Blackwood Group. The room froze. Damien stood motionless for a moment, then took another step forward. His voice dropped, rough and raw. If I have to choose, I choose Lila. Eleanor's eyes darkened. Do you know what you're saying? I do, he answered without hesitation. You taught me to protect what I believe in. This is what I believe. Eleanor rose. Even in her 60s, she carried the regal bearing of a woman who had built an empire with her bare hands. The firelight flickered across her face, half in gold, half in shadow. You're betraying your father's legacy, she said coldly. Blackwood Group is his blood. Damien's gaze didn't waver. And she's my breath. The words dropped heavy as thunder in the silence. The fire cracked, sparks leaping upward, casting their faces in an orange glow, and in Damien's eyes burned both defiance and pain. Eleanor's hands tightened on the chair's arms. You're blind, Damien. That woman has changed you. She's made you weak. No. He shook his head slowly, stepping closer still. She's made me alive. Eleanor's mouth curved into a faint, bitter smile. Alive by turning against your own mother? He inhaled sharply, voice trembling with suppressed rage. Alive by daring to love, to believe, and to do what feels right. You wouldn't understand. You only know control, not love. Eleanor's hand shot up as if he had said something unforgivable. Silence, Damien. You don't know what love is? Without me, you'd have nothing. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled a sad, broken smile. And because of you, I have everything except happiness. That made her falter. For a flicker of a second, the ice in her eyes cracked before she masked it again with iron resolve. You'll regret this, she said, voice low and sharp. Women like her only drag men like you down. You're wrong, Damien said, his tone burning now. She's the reason I want to rise, not for power, but for love. The space between them vanished to only a few feet. The firelight flickered over his face, outlining every sharp, determined line, the face of a man no longer under anyone's shadow. I used to believe everything you did was for me, he said softly, but now I see you were just afraid of losing control. Don't talk as if you understand me, Eleanor said, her voice cracking slightly. You're all I have left. Everything I've done was to keep you. Keep me? Damien laughed quietly, though tears glimmered in his eyes. You didn't keep me, Mother. You made me lose myself. A strong gust blew through the window, causing the curtains to billow. The fire wavered, throwing their silhouettes across the walls, two figures locked in a battle of love and pride, light and shadow. Eleanor turned away, her voice breaking for the first time. If you walk out that door to be with her, don't expect to come back. I will consider myself childless. Damien was silent. He stepped closer, stood behind her chair, and leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her silver hair. I'll always be your son, he whispered, but I'm also a man, and I won't lose love again. Then he turned and walked away, Behind him, her voice trembled with fury and desperation. Damien! If you leave, Blackwood will collapse. He paused at the threshold, rain roaring outside, his voice low but firm. If an empire must survive at the cost of love and truth, it deserves to fall. The door shut behind him. The hinges groaned, then silence, only the rain remained. Eleanor stood frozen, her hands shaking as the wine spilled over her fingers. In the wavering firelight, she saw a reflection in the glass, her late husband's gentle eyes staring back. The same eyes Damien had just turned on her. Her lips moved, her voice faint, almost a whisper. Just like your father. Exactly like your father. Outside, Damien crossed the courtyard, his coat soaked through, but he didn't slow. The rain hit his face, mingling with the heat in his chest. He slid into the driver's seat, exhaling a deep, shuddering breath. In the dashboard compartment lay a small silver ring, the one he'd once planned to give Lila 3 years ago. He opened the box, stared at it, and murmured, "This time, I won't let anyone take you from me again." The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain. The car sped into the storm, leaving behind the glowing manor and a mother standing at the window, caught between pride and fear, unable to admit that she had just lost the only thing she ever truly loved. By Monday morning, the storm had found its way into the headlines. Every major financial paper carried the same sensational line: CEO Damien Black involved in affair with design partner on True Legacy project. A single photograph, grainy, shot from a distance, spread like wildfire across the internet. It showed Damien and Lila standing together in the lobby of the Langford Hotel. He was leaning toward her, saying something softly, his gaze too close, too intimate. And she, in a white dress, was looking up at him with eyes no one could mistake for professional. Within 24 hours, the internet exploded. Articles, think pieces, and gossip videos multiplied by the minute. Half the world swooned over a real-life fairy tale romance. The other half condemned her as a woman who climbed her way up with beauty and charm. Lila didn't need to read more than a few lines to feel the weight of it all. Every word cut like glass. Who is she? To make Damien Black lose control. Love or manipulation? A scandal that shames the Blackwood legacy. In the top floor office of the Blackwood Tower, Damien sat before the window, his phone lighting up with messages from legal advisors, PR officers, and the board of directors. He didn't open any of them. He just stared out at the stream of cars below, watching the city move as if nothing had happened. Beside him, Marcus, his friend and CFO, paced, his tone urgent. "You need to respond, Damien. Deny it, or at least say the press got it wrong." "No," Marcus froze. "No? You're handing your mother the perfect excuse to tear you down. The board's already called an emergency meeting." Damien turned from the window, his gaze steady. "I won't deny something real. If they see love as weakness, let them." Marcus sighed, lowering his voice. "You know what she'll do now, don't you?" "Yeah." Damien looked into the cold coffee on his desk. "She won't stop until Lila's gone from my life." That afternoon, Lila's phone rang. The number belonged to the Blackwood Communications office. The woman on the other end spoke politely, too politely, with a tone of polished steel. "Miss Dawson, given the current situation, we have no choice but to suspend your role in the True Legacy campaign until the matter is resolved." Lila said nothing. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Thank you for letting me know," she managed, her voice calm but trembling underneath. When the call ended, she sat still for a long moment. The sketches and concept boards were scattered across her table, every line carrying traces of them, of shared ideas, laughter, and late nights. A breeze slipped in through the open window, scattering the papers across the floor. She watched them flutter, feeling the emptiness rise inside her. Maya entered, face pale. "Lila, they're saying you're the reason Blackwood might collapse." Lila gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe they're right. I never realized love could come at such a high price." That night, Damien's office was drenched in darkness. He had just returned from the board meeting, the one his mother hadn't attended, but her influence had been everywhere. The shareholders had demanded he temporarily step down as CEO, pending internal review. Even a few friends had looked away as they cast their votes. He understood. Eleanor Black had won this round as she always did. When the door closed behind him, Damien sank into his chair and unlocked his phone. No messages, no calls. Only one new email from Elle Dawson. He opened it. The blue-white glow lit his face as he read the short, simple lines that sliced through his chest like a blade. From Lila Dawson, subject, about the True Legacy Project. Damien, I know I'm at the center of all this, and I don't want to be the reason you lose everything your company, your reputation, or what you've built your whole life for. I'm choosing to withdraw from the project. And from your life. Don't look for me, Damien. I once left because I was forced to. This time I'm leaving because it's my choice. Lila? He sat in silence, the dim light catching the reflection in his eyes. His hand trembled around the phone, his knuckles white. For the first time in years, Damien felt pain so sharp he could barely breathe. The last line of her email echoed in his head again and again, like the toll of a distant bell. This time I'm leaving because it's my choice. He rose slowly, walked to the window and looked out over the glittering city. Everything he'd once thought he needed, power, prestige, admiration, now meant nothing. He could lose it all if it meant keeping her, but she was gone again, and this time it was because of him. He pressed his forehead against the glass, eyes closed, whispering into the silence. Lila, why do you always choose to sacrifice even when I'm ready to give up everything for you? Below, the traffic surged on beneath the rain, indifferent to anyone's heartbreak. In the highest room of the tower, a man stood motionless, eyes hollow, staring into the night towards somewhere far away, where a woman might be packing her bags to disappear once more from his world. The next morning, Damien arrived at the office before anyone else. His assistant looked up, startled the dark circles under his eyes, the sharper edge in his expression. He said only one sentence. Book me a flight to Florence today. Sir, the board. I don't care about the board, Damien cut in, his voice low but unyielding. The only meeting I need right now is with her. He walked out, carrying nothing but his coat and a small silver ring, the one he'd once meant to give her. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy with clouds. A month had passed since Damien left New York to find her. He had gone to Florence, the city she once described with that spark in her eyes, where the sunlight turns the stone walls golden like honey. He went to Paris, to Venice, even to the quiet towns along the Amalfi Coast, where Dawson's studio had once left traces of its designs. But everywhere he went, there was only emptiness. No one knew her. No letters, no address, no sign that she still existed in his world. When he returned to Manhattan, winter had already arrived. The sky hung low and gray, and the city seemed to shrink into the silence that had become his life. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The top floor of Blackwood Tower still glowed each night, but the light no longer belonged to work. There were no documents on his desk anymore, only blank pages and the small silver ring he had carried throughout his journey. Damien sat by the window, watching the city dissolve into mist. The car lights below blinked faintly, like the fading heartbeat of a body too tired to keep living. The door opened. Marcus entered, bringing in the scent of cold air and hot coffee. He looked at Damien, the man who once made the world bow, now just a shadow in a wrinkled white shirt, eyes sunken, as if every night had become a battle to survive. You can't keep living like this, Marcus said softly, setting the coffee down. I'm fine. Fine? Marcus frowned. You've skipped every meeting, ignored the board, and abandoned the True Legacy launch. The press is calling you a ghost CEO. They're saying the empire's collapsing. I haven't disappeared, Damien said quietly. I just have nothing left to appear for. Marcus was silent for a moment, then sat across from him. I always thought you could endure anything, but maybe I was wrong. You can lose the whole world, Damien, just don't lose the person who made you want to live in it. Damien lifted his gaze, weary but lucid. I already have. She doesn't want to be found. It's not because she stopped loving you, Marcus said gently. It's because she thinks she's saving you again. Damien turned toward the window. Outside, the gray sky stretched endlessly vast, silent and empty. Like the chapter, his life was now writing for itself, the empty sky, a sky without her. That afternoon, he went back to the design floor, the space once alive with sketches and laughter, during the True Legacy project. Now it was silent. The boards had been cleared, the drawings stacked neatly in a corner. He stopped at her desk, small, minimalist, where a yellow sticky note still clung to the monitor. Never forget, emotion is the soul of every brand. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hurt. Under a pile of folders, he found a sketch she hadn't finished. A pencil drawing of two hands reaching for each other, almost touching with a tiny, unshaded gap left between them. Damien sat in her chair, fingertips brushing the soft graphite lines. A single drop fell onto the paper. He wasn't sure if it was a tear or condensation from his cold hands. That unfinished space between the hands felt like everything they were. A love paused mid-reach, a touch interrupted before it could become whole. The winter sunset slid across the window pane, spilling soft amber light into the empty room. Damien closed his eyes and her voice echoed in his memory. You don't understand. Sometimes love isn't enough to stay. He opened them again, inhaled deeply. No, Lila, he whispered, his voice rough, breaking. This time I won't let love be not enough. He picked up a pencil and sat before the drawing. His hand trembled, but he drew slowly, carefully connecting the two hands. When the final line closed the distance, he murmured like a vow, this time no hand will be left behind. He signed the corner, a small inscription in black ink. Damien and Lila, True Legacy. Night fell. On the rooftop, the wind howled, carrying away loose sheets of paper, but that sketch somehow stayed in place on the table, heavy as if weighted by time itself. Marcus found him there and stopped at the doorway watching. Do you still believe she'll come back? He asked quietly. Damien looked up at the dark sky, where the stars were hidden behind clouds. No, he said softly, but I believe she still sees me, wherever she is. And I'll do everything I can to make her proud when she does. Marcus exhaled, then nodded, resting a hand on his shoulder. Then start again. Finish the campaign for both of you. Damien turned to him. The grief was still there, but so was something steadier, a new clarity, a quiet fire. You're right, he said. True Legacy was never just a campaign. It was our story. He took the sketch in his hands, walked toward the desk, and said in a low, steady voice that filled the empty room, she left emotion in every line she drew. The rest, I'll complete. The next morning, headlines changed tone. Damien Black returns relaunches True Legacy as a testament to love and perseverance. No one knew that beneath his composed demeanor at the press conference, he carried a folded sheet of paper inside his jacket, the drawing of two hands now joined. When the camera flashes burst, Damien looked straight into the lens and smiled faintly. It wasn't the smile of a triumphant CEO. It was the quiet smile of a man who had finally understood that true love doesn't always need to be seen, only remembered, enough to light the empty sky within him. 3 months had passed since Lila disappeared from New York. 3 months of Damien living like a ghost in his own city. He threw himself into work just to keep from thinking, but the more he tried to forget, the emptier it all became. Every night he returned to the vast apartment that echoed only with the sound of the wind. Every morning, he opened the drawer where he kept the sketch of the two joined hands and the silver ring. One evening, Marcus walked into his office and dropped an Italian art magazine on the desk. You might want to see this. Damien looked up. On the cover was a large, striking image, a contemporary design piece titled Eternal Lines. In the corner, a signature, LD. The article read, American designer Lila Dawson opens her first solo exhibition in Florence, Italy this week. Damien read the words twice, his pulse quickening. Florence, he whispered. She's in Florence. Florence at the end of autumn was a painting come to life. Cobblestone streets twisted toward Piazza della Signoria, where Michelangelo's David stood proud beneath the Tuscan sky. Golden sunlight slid across terracotta rooftops, and the air carried the scent of espresso and dried lavender. Damien stepped out of the taxi in front of La Galleria di Luce. Outside, a line of guests waited under the shade of old trees. Inside, warm amber lights bathed the space, where paintings, models, and installations were arranged like chapters of a story. He straightened his tie, took a steady breath, and entered. The murmur of conversation echoed through the marble hall. the soft clack of heels, the quiet reverence of art. Then he froze. On the main wall hung a piece that stopped his breath. Two hands, joined complete this time, but behind them, faint outlines of the city map of Florence. He didn't need to ask. He knew. She had turned his promise into art. And then he saw her. Lila stood among a group of guests, wearing a long olive green dress, her hair swept into a loose bun that revealed the elegant curve of her neck. She spoke about her work calm, composed, her voice low and clear. The light hit her face just right, soft brown eyes, that same gentle smile with a shadow of distance in it. Damien didn't remember crossing the room. One moment, he was watching her from afar. The next, she turned and their eyes met. It was instant, like two live wires touching, setting the air between them on fire. Lila's breath caught. "Damien," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" He took a step closer, his voice steady but quiet. "I came for you." She gave a small, wistful smile. "You came all this way to say goodbye?" He shook his head, gaze burning with something unguarded and raw. "No, I came to ask for a beginning." The world around them faded. The murmurs, the clinking glasses, the polite laughter all dissolved into a fragile silence meant for two. Lila's voice trembled. "Damien, you shouldn't be here. The press, the shareholders—" "You'll ruin," he interrupted, low but firm. "I've already lost everything except this. I came so I wouldn't lose it too." Her pulse raced. "You don't understand. I did this to save you." "I don't need to be saved from love, Lila," he said softly, stepping closer. "I just need you." The entire gallery seemed to be still as Damien stopped before her, beneath the golden light. He held out his hand, his voice carrying like a vow, not just for her, but for everyone who was listening. "If loving you is wrong, I'll spend my whole life being wrong." The room went silent. Then came the faint clicking of cameras. Some reporters had already noticed him. But Damien didn't care. His eyes never left hers. His hand stayed extended, waiting. Lila looked around the crowd of critics, curators, artists all watching, and behind them, her own work, the joined hands glowing beneath the lights of Florence. Tears welled in her eyes. "Damien," she whispered, voice trembling, "do you know what this will cost you?" He smiled faintly, no longer the smile of a CEO, but of a man finally unafraid. "Everything without you is worth nothing." Her fingers brushed his hesitant, trembling. When his hand closed around hers, the warmth that flooded through her body was so achingly familiar, it made her breath catch. For the first time in 3 years, their hands met, not in memory, not in art, but in life. And in that instant, she realized she had been waiting to hear him say those words for 3 long years. "Then don't waste another second," he whispered. She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek, but her smile was real soft, luminous, alive. He reached up and wiped the tear gently from her face. Applause began to ripple around them, hesitant at first, then growing louder, like the city itself was bearing witness. But for them, there was only silence. A silence filled with everything they'd never stopped feeling. Lila leaned her forehead against his shoulder, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "You found me." He tightened his hold, answering quietly, "And I won't let you disappear again." No more walls, no more hands left reaching. They turned together toward her artwork, the two joined hands, bathed in golden light. And for the first time in years, the symbol wasn't unfinished. It was whole. Outside, Florence hummed with life church bells, laughter, footsteps echoing on cobblestones. But inside La Galleria de Luce, time stood still. Under the same Tuscan sky where she had once hidden her heart, she finally found it again. Right where she had left it, in his hands. Night in Florence. The sky was draped in black velvet, while the city's golden lights shimmered over the Arno like 1,000 fallen stars. The bells of Santa Croce rang in slow, solemn rhythm, echoing like the heartbeat of the ancient city itself. Damien led Lila through the narrow cobblestone streets, where the air smelled faintly of warm bread and red wine. They had just left the gallery, the place where, before the eyes of hundreds, he had finally said aloud what he had carried in silence for 3 years. Neither spoke on the walk back to the hotel. He walked slowly, his hand clasping hers as if one small, lucid moment might make her vanish again. She walked beside him, eyes on the stones beneath her feet, heart beating slow and deep. When the door closed behind them, the world outside disappeared. Only the soft amber light of Florence filtered through the window, bathing them in a golden hush. Lila turned away, standing by the window, arms wrapped around herself. Her voice trembled. "Damien, I don't know if I'm brave enough for this." He stepped closer, stopping just behind her. His breath touched her neck, warm, rough, like the whisper of night itself. "You were brave enough to leave 3 years ago," he murmured. "Be brave enough now to stay." She closed her eyes. Tears slid down her trembling hands. "What if your mother never forgives me?" He gently turned her to face him, his hands resting on her shoulders. In the faint gold of the city lights, his eyes were deep as the sea. "I don't need anyone's permission to love you." She looked up at him. In that instant, every wall she'd built for 3 years crumbled. "Damien," her voice broke. "I missed you. So much it hurts to breathe." He leaned his forehead to hers. "I never stopped missing you. No matter how hard I tried." A tear rolled down her cheek. He caught it with his lips. The kiss began soft, then deepened, as though each of them was tasting the ache they'd carried alone. His hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer, while hers rested against his chest, feeling the hard, quick rhythm of his heart beneath his shirt. There were no accusations anymore, no misunderstandings, no shadow of Eleanor Black between them. Only two people bare, scarred, and still in love. They reconciled in breath, in the press of lips, in the way he held her as if trying to erase the distance of 3 long years. Every kiss along her neck was an unspoken apology, every touch a promise renewed. Her fingers traced the lines of his face, mapping every feature she had memorized and missed. "Tonight," she whispered against his ear, "let me believe this is real." His arms tightened around her, his voice low, burning like fire in a quiet hearth. "Tonight, I won't let you dream. Tonight, I'll let you live." The room seemed to shrink around them. The scent of his sandalwood and mint mingled with the lavender drifting from the balcony. City lights spilled across the white sheets, glimmering like brushstrokes on a living canvas. Every move he made was slow, reverent, like a man touching something sacred he'd once lost. She responded with trembling grace, fragile but radiant, her eyes shining with the kind of light one only finds upon coming home. That night was not loud or frantic. It was a night of release, a night of two hearts that had endured too much, finally finding their way back to each other. They spoke in whispers between breaths, words they'd both left unsaid for years. About the night she left, about the letters she never sent, about the dreams he woke from, reaching for her across an empty bed, about how both had lived without truly living for 3 long years. She cried in his arms, no longer hiding, no longer holding back. He kissed her hair, her forehead, her tears, each kiss sewing together what life had torn apart. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have found the truth sooner." She shook her head. "No, I should have told you everything. But maybe we had to walk through that distance to understand real love doesn't die just because of time." When the Florence night fell silent, they lay entwined, no space left between them. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady, strong. He felt her breath against his skin, soft and warm. Everything else, the boardroom, the press, the empire, faded into nothing. There was only breath and heartbeat. He pulled the blanket up, shielding her from the world. She pressed her face to his shoulder and whispered, "This time, I won't leave again." Damien tightened his arms around her, his voice deep and sure in the dark. "This time, I won't let you go." They fell asleep finally, not inside a memory, but in reality. Morning in Florence. Sunlight spilled through the window like liquid gold, warm and gentle across the white sheets. Lila stirred, eyes fluttering open. Damien's scent, sandalwood and mint, still clung to her skin, to her hair like a quiet signature. He was still asleep beside her, his arm draped protectively around her waist, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear again. She smiled the smile of someone who had finally survived the storm. "This time," she whispered softly, "I won't leave again." Damien's eyes opened, a faint smile curving his lips. I've heard that somewhere before. She laughed softly. I kept repeating it to myself all night. He drew her closer, their foreheads touching. Then say it again. Every morning, outside the church bells chimed a blessing carried by the Florentine air. The city remained beautiful as ever, but in their eyes, nothing could compare to this moment. The quiet morning light, the scent of love renewed, and the knowledge that they were no longer people of the past, but two souls beginning a brand new present. Back in New York, the March wind swept between skyscrapers, carrying the last chill of winter. The black Bentley rolled past the iron gates of Black Manor, the estate that had once stood as a monument to power and control. Lila sat beside Damien, her hand resting gently on his thigh, steady yet trembling faintly. Her heartbeat quickened every time she thought of the woman waiting for them inside. Damien squeezed her fingers, his eyes softening. You don't have to be afraid. This time, I'm here. She smiled faintly, though her voice was unsteady. I'm not afraid of her, only that her heart may not be ready. She will understand, he said quietly. In the end, she's still my mother. The living room of Black Manor looked the same as before, solemn, heavy with memories, steeped in elegance and silence. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting amber light that danced against the carved wood and marble. In the old armchair sat Eleanor Black, her frame still graceful, her posture still regal, but her eyes, for the first time, no longer cold. She looked up as they entered. Her gaze lingered on their joined hands. Damien bowed slightly, his voice low but steady. Mother. Then he drew Lila gently forward. I want you to meet the woman I love. Not as a CEO, not as the heir of Blackwood, but simply as me, your son. The room fell utterly still. Lila took a small step closer, her voice quiet but sincere. Good afternoon, Mrs. Black. Eleanor said nothing at first. Her eyes studied the young woman, the same woman she had once feared for what she might take from her son. The woman she had tried to erase from his life. But what she saw now was not defiance. It was calm, compassion, a quiet strength. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice low, roughened with age and something else. Sit down. I'm too old to keep fighting anyone anymore. For a long while, no one spoke. Only the old grandfather clock ticked between them. Damien sat beside Lila, his hand still entwined with hers. Eleanor's gaze moved between them slowly, thoughtfully, as if she were seeing two pieces she had once torn apart, finally returned to their rightful place. I used to think protecting you meant choosing for you, she said at last, her tone soft but weighted. But perhaps it means letting you choose for yourself. Damien looked up, surprise flickering across his features. Mother! Eleanor's lips curved in a faint, fragile smile, one he hadn't seen in years. When you walked out of this house, I thought you were being reckless. But every night after, I looked toward your window and saw no light there anymore. That's when I realized I hadn't just lost a son, I'd lost the reason I was still alive. Her breath trembled. I was wrong, Damien. I hurt you because I was afraid. I thought she would make you weak. But perhaps she's the one who made you whole. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She gripped Damien's hand tighter before leaning forward, voice shaking but gentle. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I only hope you know I never wanted to hurt him. Eleanor nodded faintly. I know. And I'm tired, my dear. The empire can rise or fall. It no longer matters to me. She turned to Damien then, her voice steady but full of emotion. I've transferred all my shares to you. From now on, you'll run Blackwood as you believe it should be run. As for me, she smiled softly, I'm stepping away. I want to spend whatever time I have left learning to be silent and to hear you laugh again. Damien sat frozen, speechless. He had imagined reconciliation 1,000 different ways, but never this. Never his mother, the formidable Eleanor Black, letting go not because she was defeated, but because she had finally understood. Eleanor turned her eyes to Lila, and for the first time they softened fully. If she makes you happy, she said to Damien, then I can rest easy. Lila broke down, tears glistening as she reached forward and clasped the older woman's thin, delicate hands. Thank you, she whispered, voice trembling. Thank you for giving him life. Eleanor smiled a real smile, weary but kind. She lifted one hand to Lila's cheek. Do what I never learned to do, she said softly. Love, with your whole heart. When they left the manor, the sky above New York was brushed with violet twilight. Damien was quiet the entire drive until the car passed through the gates. Then he turned to her, his hand finding hers again. I saw her smile today, he said, a small wonder in his tone. For the first time in years. You know that's because of you. Lila shook her head, tears still glimmering at the corners of her eyes. No, Damien. It's because of you. Because you loved her enough to forgive her, and loved me enough to fight for both. The car glided down Fifth Avenue, the city lights reflecting in the glass. Outside, night descended slowly, but inside that car, for the first time in years, light had finally returned. 1 year later, Florence welcomed them with a golden morning that felt like memory itself. Terracotta rooftops glowed beneath a soft blue sky. Church bells echoed through the air, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and blooming jasmine. At Galleria de Luz, a long line of guests stretched outside for the opening of Eternal Lines, the first joint exhibition between Blackwood Media and Dawson Studio. The title Eternal Lines was more than a project. It was their story. The promise of two souls who had once lost each other and finally found their way home. Inside the grand hall, golden light shimmered across a series of installations blending design, photography, and digital art. On the walls, sketches, paintings, and projections merged into a seamless narrative of ruin and rebirth, of shadow and light. At the center stood the highlight piece. Two hands, one light. Two hands reaching across a glowing band of illumination, symbolizing a love no longer unfinished. Lila stood beside Damien, wearing an ivory satin dress, simple, elegant. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, catching the light. Her brown eyes, calm and deep, reflected the soft glow of the hall. Damien, in a light gray suit, looked as composed as ever, but his gaze softened every time it found her. Around them, the crowd of critics, artists, investors, and journalists buzzed with admiration. A reporter raised his hand. Mr. Black, he began, you once said that business and love can't coexist. What do you think now? Damien smiled slightly, his eyes flicking to Lila. I used to believe that, he said, until I met someone who proved that the truest things never stand in our way, they make us better. The room erupted in flashes and applause. Lila squeezed his hand gently, whispering under her breath, You just melted half the media. He leaned closer, murmuring back with a smirk, As long as you melt first. She laughed softly, blushing as she lowered her gaze. When the official ceremony began, the lights dimmed. An Italian curator stepped forward, gave a brief introduction, and then invited Damien to the stage. He walked up slowly, bathed in golden light. This was no longer the cold CEO of New York, but a man who had learned what it meant to truly live. His voice carried steady and warm across the hall. A year ago, I lost everything, my company, my reputation, even myself. But from the ashes, one thing remained untouched. Love. He paused, his eyes finding Lila's in the front row, eyes filled with pride and peace and something eternal. Real love, he said softly, doesn't need permission. It only needs to be kept. The silence that followed was absolute. Then came the applause, first gentle, then growing, filling every corner of the room. Damien stepped down from the podium and walked toward her. He held out his hand. She rose, meeting him halfway. Their fingers intertwined beneath the cascade of camera flashes. And there, under the warm Florentine light, he kissed her. Not hurried, not for show, but slow, deep, and full of meaning. A kiss that held their past, their present, and their future all at once. The applause swelled again. Some smiled, some wiped tears, some lifted their phones to capture what they knew was more than a moment, it was a testament. Among the ancient walls of Florence, under the amber glow of art and faith, two people who had once lost each other now stood side by side, as if they had never been apart. Later, when the gallery had quieted and the crowd dispersed, Damien and Lila stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. From there, the whole city stretched before them, the Arno winding like silk through the heart of Florence, the sunset pouring honey-colored light across its surface. The breeze brushed her hair, carrying the faint fragrance of jasmine. He came up behind her, arms circling her waist, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. They didn't speak at first. There was only the hush of wind, the faint sound of distant bells, and the rhythm of two hearts beating in unison. "Do you remember the first time I stood here?" Lila asked softly. "I told you Florence was the city that kept my heart." "I remember," Damien said quietly. "And now?" She turned to him, smiling. "Now it's not here anymore. It's in your hands." He looked at her, and in his eyes was both the sunset and the dawn. "You know," he said, his voice tender, "I once thought everything ended in New York. But maybe Florence was where it truly began." Lila rested her hand against his chest, feeling the steady warmth beneath. "I once woke up in your bed with the scent of the past," she whispered. "Now I wake with the scent of the future." Damien smiled, drawing her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Then let's write that future together one day, one breath at a time." She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the horizon as the sun slipped behind the hills, leaving streaks of amber and rose across the sky. In that moment, Florence seemed to stand still. The city, the river, the air, everything wrapped in the quiet glow of love that no longer needed to prove itself. Down below, a street musician began to play a soft Italian violin melody, rising through the air, mingling with the sound of the river. On the terrace above, Damien and Lila stood hand in hand, listening in silence. Behind them, inside the gallery, the final piece hung beneath a single spotlight. A simple image, two hands intertwined, a burst of light at their touch. Its title, Forever, This Time. And for the first time, it wasn't just art. It was a promise kept. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family.